The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plains where the small Apache settlement lay hidden against the backdrop of rugged hills. In this unforgiving land, survival was a daily battle, and danger was always near, sometimes in the form of harsh weather, sometimes from hostile men who saw the native people as obstacles to their own ambitions. Among the Apache was a woman named Neil. She was known for her quiet strength and the fierce love she held for her young son, Tyon. Though her people had long suffered under encroachment and cruelty, Nayeli carried a spark of hope in her heart. She dreamed of a future where her son could grow up free, safe from the shadow of violence and hatred. But that future seemed impossible now. Rumors had begun to spread through the nearby ranching town that Nayeli had been marked for death. The cause was a twisted story, born of fear and misunderstanding, but one that had taken hold like wildfire. Some claimed she had betrayed a local family. Others said she was involved in a crime she did not commit. None of it was true, but in those days, truth was often irrelevant. The sheriff and several ranchers were determined to send a message to make an example out of Nayeli. It was a warning not just to her, but to all who resisted or stood apart from the white settlers claiming the land. Death was their tool, swift and brutal. Nayeli knew what was coming. She had heard the whispers in the wind, seen the men lurking at the edges of her village, watching and waiting. She clutched Tyon close each night, whispering promises of protection and escape. Though she had no plan, only the fierce hope that, somehow, someone would help her. That someone arrived on a dusty afternoon when the town's heat shimmered like a mirage over the cracked earth. His name was Elias, a lone rancher who lived miles from town, a man known for his solitude and quiet resolve. Elias had little to do with the townsfolk, preferring the company of his horses and the wide-open sky. But something about the fear he saw in Nayeli's eyes stirred a long-dormant sense of justice within him. Elias was no stranger to hardship himself. He had lost family to the same violence that now threatened Nayeli. He knew the bitter taste of grief and the cost of standing alone against the tides of cruelty. So when Nayeli appeared at the edge of his property, desperate and hunted, he did not turn her away. "I don't have much, but what I do have is yours," Elias said simply. His voice was low, steady, a rare promise in a world of broken ones. For Nayeli, that promise was a lifeline. It meant safety, for now, and the chance to fight for a future she feared was slipping away. But the danger was far from over. The men who wanted her dead would not rest, and they would come for her with a vengeance. As dusk settled, Elias and Nayeli sat by the fire, the boy sleeping between them. The night was quiet, but the silence was heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Elias knew the road to safety would be perilous and lonely. But for Nayeli and her child, he would stand against the storm even if it meant facing death itself. Elias had always been a man of few words. In the small, dusty town near the edge of the Apache lands, people spoke of him in whispers, sometimes with respect, often with suspicion. He lived alone on a weather-beaten ranch, miles away from the nearest neighbors, a place where the wind howled through the open plains like a restless spirit. His past was something no one dared ask about. To Elias, that was how he liked it. Years ago, Elias had been like any other man, part of a tight-knit family, struggling to carve out a life in the unforgiving wilderness. But tragedy had ripped that world apart. A violent raid, one of many brutal clashes between settlers and native tribes, had taken his wife and child. The pain left him hollow, fueling a deep bitterness toward the cruelty and prejudice that had destroyed everything he loved. He buried his sorrow in solitude and work, tending his horses and keeping his land. The townsfolk left him alone, assuming his silence was bitterness or madness. But inside, Elias still held a flicker of hope, buried beneath years of loss. Hope that maybe, somehow, he could make a difference. When Nayeli appeared on his doorstep, desperate and terrified, Elias saw something he hadn't felt in a long time, a chance to fight for justice. Her story, though told in fragments and fears, was familiar. The shadow of hate and violence was closing in on her. Just as it had once taken from him, Nayeli carried her son with a protective fierceness that reminded Elias of the family he had lost. Despite her exhaustion, there was strength in her eyes, a determination to survive that stirred something deep inside him. He led them inside the small cabin. He called home a modest structure with creaking floorboards and a fireplace that hadn't seen much use lately. The walls held stories, etched in the scars of a lonely man's life. But Elias was willing to share this space, this fragile sanctuary, with a woman and child who had nowhere else to go. "Why help me?" Nayeli asked softly. Once the initial fear began to fade, Elias paused. He looked into her eyes, seeing the weight she carried, the fear for her child's life. The hopelessness. Because no one deserves to die for something they didn't do, he replied, and because I know what it's like to lose everything. Nayeli nodded, tears threatening to spill but held back by the strength that had carried her this far. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a flicker of hope, but Elias knew this was only the beginning. The men hunting Nayeli were ruthless, and the town's hatred was as fierce as the desert sun. The sheriff, the ranchers, the neighbors, they all wanted her gone. And they wouldn't stop until she was. Elias had to act fast. He began by gathering supplies, food, medicine, anything that could help them survive the harsh days ahead. He taught Nayeli how to move quietly, how to read the land for signs of danger. Every moment was a lesson in survival. Every breath a reminder that the enemy could strike at any time. As days passed, Elias and Nayeli grew more than just allies. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in the fires of desperation and hope. Elias shared stories of his past, his loss, while Nayeli spoke of her tribe, her dreams for Tayon and the life she longed to protect. But the outside world was closing in. Scouts from the town had spotted Nayeli's tracks near Elias's ranch. The sheriff's men were organizing search parties, determined to capture or kill her. Rumors spread faster than wildfire, poisoning the few who might have helped. One night, Elias stood watch by the window, rifle in hand, listening to the distant sounds of hooves pounding across the plains. The hunt was beginning. He looked at Nayeli and Tayon, sleeping on the small cot, and his resolve hardened. No one's taking you from me, he whispered. Elias was ready to fight, not just for Nayeli and her child, but for the chance to stand against the cruelty that had haunted him for years. He was a lone rancher, yes, but now he was something more, a guardian, a protector, and maybe even a spark of hope in a land scarred by hatred. The sun rose blood-red over the horizon, casting long shadows across the parched land. Elias stood at the edge of his property, eyes scanning the distant ridges for signs of movement. The weight of the rifle in his hands was heavy, but heavier still was the burden of what he'd promised Nayeli: protection at all costs. Nayeli and Tayon slept inside the small cabin, but Elias knew they wouldn't remain safe for long. The men from town were ruthless, driven by fear and hatred. And once hatred took hold, it blinded reason and mercy. It began with whispers. The sheriff had posted wanted notices, promising a reward for Nayeli's capture. Ranchers and townsfolk talked in the saloons and around campfires, trading stories about the dangerous Apache woman who dared defy them. Some were afraid, others eager to prove their loyalty by hunting her down. Elias felt the growing tension like a tightening noose. He had little trust left in the world, but for Nayeli and Tayon, he would risk everything. Over the next days, he reinforced his small ranch, blocking paths, hiding supplies, and setting traps in case the hunters came. One evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple, Elias and Nayeli sat by the fire. Tayon played quietly with a worn wooden toy, unaware of the danger beyond the walls. "We can't stay here forever," Nayeli said softly, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "They'll find us eventually." Elias nodded. "I know. But running blindly will only put you and the boy in more danger." He looked into her eyes, tired but fierce, and felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper in his chest. "We have to fight, in our own way," he said. "Stay hidden, be ready. I won't let them take you." The days passed with tense silence, broken only by the sounds of animals and the wind through the dry grass. Then, one night, it happened. A sharp noise, the crunch of boots on gravel, alerted Elias instantly. He grabbed his rifle and moved silently outside. Shadows danced under the moonlight as two men crept toward the cabin, their eyes cold and hard. Elias held his breath, heart pounding like a drum. He waited for the perfect moment. When the men were close enough, he stepped out, voice steady but commanding. "Stop right there." The men froze. One reached for his belt, but Elias's shot rang out first. A warning bullet that cracked the night air and stopped their advance. "Back off," Elias warned, stepping forward, rifle steady. The men hesitated, then retreated into the darkness, cursing under their breath. Elias knew this was only the beginning. The next days brought more threats, shots fired at dawn, rustling sounds near the cabin, and once, a fire started in the dry brush close to their home. Elias worked tirelessly to put it out before it could spread. Nayeli admired Elias's strength and courage. "You don't have to do this alone," she told him one evening. voice trembling with emotion. "I don't intend to," Elias replied, "but it's my fight now, too." Their bond deepened as they faced the danger together, each drawing strength from the other. Elias taught Nayeli how to defend herself and move quietly through the land, while she shared knowledge of the terrain and survival passed down through generations. But the community's hatred was relentless. A group of men from town organized a posse, determined to hunt Nayeli down once and for all. They rode through the hills, scouring every creek and canyon. Elias, prepared for the inevitable confrontation, he knew that when the hunters came, it would be more than just a fight for survival. It would be a stand against the injustice and cruelty that had stained the land for too long. On a cold, clear morning, with the sun just breaking over the ridge, the posse arrived, horses stamped impatiently, men scanning the terrain with weapons ready. Elias met them at the edge of his property, standing tall and unyielding. "This ends now," he said. The leader sneered. "You're siding with a savage. You'll regret this, rancher." Elias's eyes burned with quiet fury. "She's no savage, and I'm not afraid." The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. The fight for Nayeli's life and for justice had truly begun. Days blurred into restless nights as Elias, Nayeli, and young Tayon stayed hidden in the rugged hills surrounding the ranch. The threat from the town's posse was ever present, like a storm cloud hanging low and heavy over their heads. Every rustle in the brush, every distant hoofbeat, made their hearts pound with warning. Nayeli watched Elias carefully, learning from his sharp instincts and quiet confidence. Despite the danger, there was a strange comfort in their shared determination. Elias wasn't just protecting them, he was fighting against a cruelty that had long been accepted as normal in these lands. Tayon, unaware of the peril around him, clung to his mother's side. His wide eyes flickered with innocence, but Nayeli knew the fear beneath. She held him close, whispering soft lullabies in their Apache tongue, trying to shield him from a world that had already shown so much darkness. One afternoon, as Elias checked the perimeter, he spotted fresh tracks near a dry creek bed. The posse was closer than ever. He hurried back to warn Nayeli, "They're coming. We need to move," Elias said, voice low but urgent. Nayeli nodded, quickly gathering their few belongings. The rugged terrain was harsh, but it offered cover and escape routes that only someone familiar with the land could navigate. Elias and Nayeli moved like shadows, careful and deliberate, guiding Tayon through rocky paths and dense thickets. That night, as they huddled beneath the stars, Elias spoke quietly. "They think fear will drive you away. But it's hope that keeps us moving." Nayeli looked at him, grateful for the strength he gave her. "You've already saved us. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Elias shook his head. "No repayment, just keep fighting." But the posse wasn't far behind. The following days brought near misses, distant gunshots echoing through the valleys, hurried voices calling out in the dark, and the constant danger of being discovered. One evening, while gathering firewood, Nayeli spotted a shadow moving swiftly between the trees. She froze, heart pounding. Elias was nearby and quickly joined her, silently signaling to prepare. The shadow stepped into the firelight, a scout from the posse. Elias stepped forward, rifle raised. "This is your last warning. Leave now." The man sneered but backed away, disappearing into the night. It was a small victory, but the message was clear. The hunt was relentless. Despite the fear, Elias and Nayeli grew closer, their bond forged through shared hardship. They spoke quietly of dreams, of a world where Tayon could run free without fear, where justice and kindness were not foreign ideas. But beneath their hope lay the reality. The fight to survive was far from over. The posse would return, and, when they did, Elias knew he had to be ready to face them head. The nights had grown colder, and the air was thick with tension. Elias knew the time was coming when hiding would no longer be enough. The posse hunting Nayeli was relentless, their hatred burning brighter with each passing day. But Elias was determined not to let fear dictate their fate. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elias rode toward the town. It was a dangerous move, returning to the place that had once cast him aside, but he needed answers, and allies. He had heard whispers of others uneasy with the brutal pursuit of Nayeli, people who questioned the justice of condemning an innocent woman to death at the saloon. Elias found his first hesitant support in Sarah, a schoolteacher known for her kindness and quiet courage. She listened as Elias recounted Nayeli's story, lies, the injustice, the threat to an innocent mother and child. "They don't see her as a person," Sarah said softly, "just a target. But there are those of us who will stand with you. Word spread slowly but surely. A few ranchers and townsfolk, tired of the violence and fear, began to question the sheriff's harsh stance. Elias and Sarah met in secret, planning how to protect Nayeli and expose the truth behind the false accusations. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Nayeli kept watch, growing stronger each day under Elias's protection. She shared stories of her tribe's resilience and wisdom, teaching Elias the value of patience and courage. One afternoon, Elias uncovered a vital piece of the puzzle, letter hidden in the sheriff's office revealing a personal vendetta behind the hunt for Nia. The sheriff's motive was not justice, but revenge and power. Armed with this knowledge, Elias and his newfound allies prepared to confront the sheriff and the posse. The fight for Nayeli's life was no longer just about survival. It was about exposing the cruelty and prejudice poisoning their community. As Elias returned to the ranch, he felt a renewed sense of hope. The battle ahead would be hard, but he was no longer alone. The dawn broke pale and gray, casting a somber light over the rugged landscape. Elias stood at the edge of his ranch, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Today was the day they would face the men who had hunted Nayeli. The day truth would clash with lies. Word had spread through the town. A small group of allies had gathered Sarah, a few honest ranchers, and others who believed in justice. They came quietly, weapons concealed but resolve clear. The sheriff and his posse arrived at Elias's ranch with the arrogance of men who believed they held all the power. Their boots stirred the dust, their eyes cold and cruel. But Elias stood, firm, blocking their path. "This ends here," Elias said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. The sheriff sneered. "You're protecting a savage. Rancher, you'll pay for this." Nayeli stepped forward, the fierce fire of her people burning in her eyes. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I seek only to live in peace with my son." A tense silence fell. Then, Elias produced the letter, the proof of the sheriff's lies and personal vendetta. The crowd murmured, shock rippling through them. The sheriff's face darkened, his control slipping. "You're all fools to believe this," he spat. But the truth was undeniable. Slowly, some men lowered their weapons, doubt replacing hatred. A battle was avoided, not with bullets but with courage and truth. Nayeli's innocence was revealed, and the sheriff's reign of fear began to crumble. Elias looked at Nayeli and Tayon, relief flooding through him. The fight had been brutal, but hope had triumphed. The sun rose over the valley, casting warm golden light across the land that had seen so much pain and struggle. For Nayeli, Tayon, and Elias, this dawn marked the beginning of something new, a future forged through courage, sacrifice, and the unyielding belief in justice. With the sheriff's lies exposed and his power broken, the town began to change. The men who had once hunted Nayeli slowly came to understand the cost of their hatred. Some apologized, others quietly left, but for Nayeli and her child, the path ahead was finally clear. Elias stood beside Nayeli as she watched Tayon run freely across the fields, laughter ringing out like a healing song. The bond between them had grown beyond protector and protected. It was a partnership, a shared hope for peace. "I never thought I'd see this day," Elias said softly, watching the boy chase the wind. Nayeli smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Neither did I, but thanks to you, we have a chance." Life was still hard, the land was unforgiving, and scars ran deep. But together, they faced each challenge with strength and determination. Elias helped Nayeli rebuild a small home on his ranch, a place where the past's shadows could not reach. The local community began to shift. Stories of Nayeli's bravery and Elias's stand spread, inspiring others to question old prejudices and to seek understanding rather than fear. Tayan grew strong. Nurtured by the love of his mother and the protection of his guardian, he learned the stories of his people, the songs and traditions passed down through generations. Alongside the values of courage and kindness he saw in Elias. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nayeli and Elias sat by the fire, the quiet crackle filling the space between them. "We fought for more than survival," Nayeli said. "We fought for a future." Elias nodded. "And it's a future worth fighting for." In the stillness of that moment, hope blossomed, a promise that even in the harshest lands, compassion and courage could light the way forward.